This is the supplement for week 2, assignment 2, creating intervals. And what I want to do is start with looking at the example and using these RGB values to follow the transitions of these intervals. And we've been talking about this a little bit, but now we're really going to see how these RGB values can really identify a clear transition between intervals. So starting with this warm analogous interval, if we measure this with the eyedropper tool, we can really start to see how in the red we see this addition of 16 units of red, between 15 and 16 units of red between each of these transitional steps along this interval. We can see when we look at the green, we're going to see an increase between 21 and 24 units between the transitional steps, and between the blue, if we check there, we can see a decrease between about 17 and 20 units of blue here. So notice that we can measure this. It's no longer just a subjective observation of yes, this transition. So if we switch back to HSB, we can see the hue here is 327, and from our previous assignment we know that this is a red magenta and that the transition here is going to a yellow orange hue, so that we can measure the hues and see that they're all following generally along this path of hue between the hues there. But we can also measure and see that level of accuracy is very precise with these RGB values. So we're getting a general impression through observation that this is correct, but then we can find factual information with these RGB values. So, you can use this initial observation and make some general comments, but I want to see the factual information also supported. So when you're creating your assignment, if something doesn't look right, go to these RGB values. So in this case, you're going to see the red. If we switch back to RGB, we can see that it's going from generally this blue to the cyan, and we're seeing that the red is increasing about 25 to 28 units across this transition or this interval. We're seeing that the green is increasing between 37 and roughly 38 units, and then if we look at that, we get a rough idea about 16 to 18. And for meeting the criteria, we want to see this trend be consistent. If it's increasing at one point and decreasing, this obviously wouldn't meet the criteria of the assignment. But to exceed the criteria, we want to see a precise level of consistency. And kind of continuing on, we want to look at all 4 of these in this supplement. In this case, we have something a little bit different going on. We saw in this one that there was a decrease in the blue value. Here we're going to see a decrease in the red value. So as we're moving from this, we'll go back here to HSB for a minute. We're seeing this red value transitioning to cyan. So we're almost traveling between complements. So we're getting those gray tones here. So it's a little bit of we were working in analogous, now we're working in complements, so there's the difference that we're seeing. But we're seeing that red decrease roughly 22, 24 units there along this transition. The green here increasing about 14, 15 units along the transition. And the blue, very similar increase, about 12, 14 units. So you see how precise that can be and this level of accuracy. And that's what I want you to really strive for in this upcoming assignment. Now when we move down to this final one, this warm, cool, let's move this up for you a little bit better. So this warm to cool in a low key interval, we're seeing in this case where there's a decrease in the red between 35 to 37 units. We're seeing a decrease in the green about 22, 21 units. And then we're seeing an increase in the blue staying very consistent between 0 and 3 units there. 0 and 1, 3 units. Very very tight there with the amount of blue. It's very stable there. So it's something to use for that factual information, that when you're saying something looks correct, we want to see that factual information. You don't want to say something's correct if there's some issue. That's going to be really important in these critiques later on in the course. We really want to have the accuracy be justified in some way. So how do you create these intervals? Now, last week it was using the hue saturation tool, and that's not going to really work in this situation because that worked for fully saturated hues and that worked for tints, shades, and tones. This week there's quite a few options. One option that I'm going to present, and you're going to have to explore other options, and this may be taking to the tutors, but I'm going to provide one option here, is using the paint bucket, and possibly in combination with some other tools. But say, for example, we wanted to take this warm analogous interval towards magenta. So again, another warmer hue. So let's go ahead and put magenta in there at 300. We don't need to fully saturate it, but I'm going to because it's just because I expect you to have some variations in saturation. I'm going to use this fully saturated just as an example. And at this point, I've expanded the interval that I'm working with. I have 8 transitional steps, so it's about 12.5% change. So this first opacity, let's go ahead and do the last one first. So I've got my paint bucket. It's at 100% opacity, which is what we were working with last week. So I'm going to fill this in. So now this is full magenta. We can see it, check it with the eyedropper tool. So go back to the paint bucket. And this first one, I just want this to be 12.5% on top. And this is very similar to what transparency with layers does, which we'll talk about later. So I'm going to lay this in here. Now you may not see much of a change initially, but we're going to come back and check these at the end. Remember, always double check yourself. So we're going to come back in here and start to do the other transitional steps. The next one would be 25. The next one's going to be about 37.5. And I'm rounding these, of course. The next one's going to be 50. The next one's going to be 67. You should start to be seeing this change pretty clearly even on the video. 75 and then 87. So we can come back now, switch back to our eyedropper tool, either use the shortcut or go to the toolbar, and we can see that this shifted 7 degrees in hue, but we should go back and really check the RGB values look for more precise. But we can also see that these hues are shifting very precise 7, 8 degrees, 10 degrees there. That's a little more than I expected. But we could check those RGB values to make sure it was precise. Perhaps did something wrong at some point. It's something that you would want to check. But that is one method of doing this. There are a number of methods, especially if you're going with Illustrated. You'll have some options as well. So explore your options for how you're going to go about doing this. This is one method that will work. But check your values. Make sure you're having your consistent RGB values working for you. Check with the tutors if you're unfamiliar with the software and how to create your intervals. Notice that level of accuracy. Refer back and see how they did this. And then as we go forward, we'll continue to use this in later weeks. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.